Today I'm talking about why car maintenance and repairs are so expensive. What do automakers and pharmaceutical companies both have in common? Believe it or not, it's their business model. You see, pharmaceutical companies are some of the most profitable companies in the world, and that's thanks to the lack of competition into the industry. In the U.S., drug makers have the exclusive right to sell a prescription drug for up to 12 years before generics are involved to appear in the market. That's why these companies can raise their price of drugs as high as they want for at least 12 years, since there are literally no other alternatives available on the market. If you think about it, pretty much, it's legalized monopoly for 12 years. And in the meantime, people who are suffering real illnesses have very little choice, and they're the ones who pay. Well, the car industry has been trying to replicate that very model, and they do this by increasingly patenting replacement parts for their cars. Proprietary high-tech engines might be understandable in a way, but I'm talking about even patenting general things like headlights, defenders, and even mirrors. So let's say you get in a car accident. Well, now you can't just choose from a bunch of generic parts because repair shops have to use patent parts from the manufacturer. And obviously these aren't cheap, especially for you as a consumer. These design patents are a lot easier to obtain than traditional patents for inventions, and they are technically only supposed to be limited to ornamental items that have a specific appearance. But once you start allowing component parts to be patented, like the grille of a Ford Focus, you're really starting to stretch that definition. And that's exactly what car companies are doing today. By doing this, companies are creating a profitable patent-enforced monopoly in aftermarket replacement parts. Consumers are left with little or no choice. And these design patents last for 14 years, which is basically the life of your car, so to speak, if you consider the average American keeps his car for 12 years. Just look at the stats. Since 2005, design patents issued on collision repair parts have more than doubled. So this is actually a trend in the industry. But this all really started back in 2008. Ford obtained patents for several collision repair parts for the 2004 F-150. That included patents for things like grills, head and tail lamps, side view mirrors, and bumpers. Soon after, Keystone Automotive Industries and a few other companies wanted to import alternative parts from overseas factories. They certainly tried, but then Ford filed an official complaint against them with the International Trade Commission. Ford alleged patent infringement. Later that same year, ITC took Ford's side on 7 of the patents, and then they barred the importation of any competing replacements into the U.S. Ultimately, both parties agreed to reach a settlement in the matter, but this gave further impetus to the car industry that patents for replacements would hold up to legal scrutiny. When courts find that a patent has been infringed, the patent owner is entitled to all the gross profits from that product's sale. That's regardless of whether the design feature played any role at all in a consumer's decision. So, guess the top 3 companies that have the most patents? Well, it's Ford, Toyota, and Honda. Just to put the sheer magnitude of that into perspective, consider this. The car industry generates the 3rd most patents filings of any business sector. The only 2 companies who generate more patent filings are those in computing and telecommunications. But it's not just the car industry. There are other industries that are also infamous for using design patents to kill the market for replacement parts. Think of things like even razors and ink cartridges. We all know these products are also notorious for relatively high prices. Everyone knows that original equipment manufacturer or OEM parts are a lot more expensive than generic ones. The American Insurance Association estimated that competing generic replacement parts are typically 34 to 83% less expensive. It's estimated generic parts could save consumers up to $2.4 billion every year. But automakers' monopoly on design parts is ever more on the rise. To be honest, most consumers don't always recognize the difference in car parts. But either way, their insurers pick up the tab, and consumers feel it eventually in higher car insurance premiums. Today, if this patented practice were applied to every car part, it's estimated to cost insurers an extra $1.5 billion per year. Automakers claim that OEM replacement parts are more reliable. But what's the truth? Opponents claim that a lot of the parts come off the same exact assembly lines and that the only thing that's different is one's labeled OEM and the other isn't. But if you're thinking that companies like Ford actually create these OEM parts, that's not necessarily the case. These big car companies just hold profitability patents on parts. Actually, it's independent suppliers that manufacture the majority of the car's parts and internal systems these days. Did you know that the top 10 suppliers captures 60% of the total revenue. And then there's planned obsolescence. Basically, this is a strategy whereby a company purposely manufactures something to decrease in performance or outright break after a period of time. The purpose is to move consumers to upgrade to a newer model, or spend hundreds or even thousands to fix the model they already have. If you haven't seen my video on planned obsolescence, check it out. Anyway, this is one way car companies are able to hide the real cost of a car. So let's say you're an engineer. All you have to do is engineer a few key components to fail in 5 years, and just after the warranty expires. This allows car makers to sell their cars for less because they know they'll get the big bucks when parts fail or get damaged in an accident. This ensures the other leg of their business, which is sales of replacement parts. Car makers control 73% of the replacement parts market, and they don't have plans of slowing down anytime soon. Believe it or not, automakers have even tried to use the Digital Millennium Copyright Act to stop owners from being able to modify their own cars. Imagine that. But there are people who want to challenge all this. Take, for example, the Parts Act. It stands for Promoting Automotive Repair, Trade, and Sales. A bipartisan coalition proposed this legislation to deal with restrictive car design patents. Californian members of Congress, Republican Darrell Issa and Democrat Zoe Lofgren, proposed these reforms to address the problem. This act limits the length of time which a design patent could be enforced against aftermarket manufacture of cosmetic car parts. Under this bill, car makers would still be protected from competing generics for up to 14 years, but the intent of the act was to reduce design patents on collision repair parts to 30 months. And then, during that time, alternative suppliers could test and develop their own parts before bringing them to market. This act would prevent car makers from copying another company's design models, and it would encourage competition for the parts aftermarket. It sounds just and novel, but sadly, versions of it haven't gone very far. Even though this act was introduced in 2013, there's similar resolutions in effect in the United Kingdom, Australia, and the European Union. There are even more reasons why car manufacturers and repair costs have gone up in the past 30 years. Modern cars today are just so much more complex than the older ones. Now today, the average new car has 30,000 parts, and they have between 50 to 100 separate computers. These control everything from the engine management, acceleration, steering, brakes, airbags, air conditioning, locks, in-car displays, and even your infotainment system. Cars today use a massive 100 million lines of computer code. Put into perspective, Android operating systems today are powered by just 12 million lines of code. And it's only going to get more complicated in the future. And then there's self-driving cars. Once these become more mainstream in the market, car repair costs surely won't be going down anytime soon. Self-driving cars will require even more comprehensive computer power, which obviously means more cost to you. Now, it's true, older cars are definitely cheaper to buy and repair, but were they more reliable? Today in the U.S., the average car spends about 11.6 years on the road. But back in the 1950s and 60s, cars were scrapped when they were 7 or 8 years old. And this was well before they reached 100,000 miles for most people. Tires lasted about 10,000 miles and exhaust systems had to be replaced every 5 years. So older cars weren't as reliable as you might have thought. Really, the biggest difference between modern and older cars has to be their onboard computers. In the 1970s, the Environmental Protection Agency mandated standards for tailpipe emissions, so manufacturers had to use electronic controls to manage fuel injection systems that cleared up the air. Think of things like spark plug firing and fuel-air mixtures, but these systems also increased the cost by a lot. A Ford F-150 was $5,697 in 1980, which is equivalent to less than 20 grand in today's dollars. Today, the F-150 base price starts at $30,000. Now, there's some good to this. Onboard computers have made diagnosing car problems a lot easier for mechanics. In the 1980s, the Society of Automotive Engineers created a universal system called Onboard Diagnostics System, also known as OBD2. This system became mandatory for manufacturers in 1996. With a new modern car, all you have to do is plug in the reader to a connection below the dashboard and you get a diagnostic code. And this code can be cross-referenced with the handbook of codes to see what it means to then fix your car. When the computers in modern cars start to fail, it'll be very tricky and expensive to diagnose and then fix them. Electronics don't like heat. The car interior is like a heat sink during the summer, especially if you live in the southern U.S. In the south, ambient car temperatures of a car parked in the hot summer sun can reach 130 to 170 degrees Fahrenheit for extended periods of time. So let's say you decide to park your car at the airport. When you finally return, it's like a sauna inside, and your onboard computer is completely busted because of it. Now you have to take it to a repair shop, and that will not be cheap. Another big factor influencing the cost of car maintenance has to do with mechanics, or lack thereof. Did you know that the number of people employed as automotive service technicians and mechanics has been growing at a rate of 3.37%? That's from 757,826 people in 2018 to 783,369 people in 2019. Yet the projected job growth for these positions for the next 10 years is minus 3.67%. Year after year, fewer and fewer young people are joining the industry. Fewer mechanic means higher repair costs. So why are so many people uninterested today in working in the car maintenance and repair industry? Well, for one, there's a general stigma against manual labor jobs. Also, this trade in particular isn't one that gets promoted as a top career choice like other jobs are. One research survey found that only 15% of auto service technicians are likely to recommend their job as a career choice. Did you know that about 46,000 service technicians will be needed to fill roles that are being left open through 2026? But there just isn't enough support for the industry today. Automakers keep reducing manufacturer repair time. Auto technicians are expected to diagnose and fix problems in a very tight time frame. It's only getting tighter. This flat rate discourages experienced auto technicians from using their time to coach recent graduates instead. Less coaches mean less training. Less training means less people who are motivated to learn the job hands-on, which means less mechanics, thereby increasing repair and maintenance costs. Many people have heard of planned obsolescence and how manufacturers reduce product lifespans so that consumers will buy new ones more often than ever before. Has car reliability gone down too? Let's look at some statistics. Did you know that the average age of cars on the road has been steadily increasing over the decades? This is according to the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. In the 1970s, the average age of a car on the road was just 5.1 years. By the turn of the century, the average age had reached 8.8 years. Better still, the data shows that in 2009, the average was 10.3 years. And today, the average age is 11.8, or almost 12 full years. And if you can believe it, car manufacturers today are making cars that are designed for at least a quarter of a century. So actually, it seems the cars are being built better than before. But there's a catch. It's all about expectations. I'm talking about what we expect from cars and how we define what's best or worse. For example, today there are affordable and economical cars that can run for 300,000 miles with regular maintenance and repair. There are sports cars capable of 500 horsepower that can last similarly, with air conditioning, heated seats, and other luxury items. They'll also get over 20 miles a gallon on a highway. But imagine, just 20 years ago, driving a car more than 100,000 miles was practically a death sentence. Each passing year, car makers offer vehicles that are more powerful, fuel efficient, reliable, safer, and require less repair. I would definitely say in that sense, modern cars are better than ever before. So what does it mean when people say that quality is going down? For instance, you might say that today's cars increasingly use plastics and composites to reduce weight, and therefore they appear less sturdy and less reliable than older cars, which are made from heavier metals and different materials. By our eyes, modern cars appear flimsier. But consider this. In an accident, a modern car crumples, folds, and can just break apart, but it does so in such a way that you reduce serious injury or even death to the occupants. The car sacrifices itself for you. This is simply because the safety technology in modern cars are much better than they were in the past. On the contrary, older cars, no matter how solid and heavy they seem to be, would bend upon impact, but in the event of an accident, the risk of death in such older cars was much higher, even at speeds less than 30 miles an hour. Did you know that before 1968, car makers weren't required to install seat belts? Even well into the 1980s, people were in no hurry to click them on. It wasn't until the 1980s that laws mandated passengers to wear them. Nowadays, the car itself will alert and remind you to fasten your seat belt, usually with a warning indicator and sound until you do so. There are other safety features too. Today, we see cars with ABS, airbags, and of course, all the latest safety features like rear view cameras, blind spot detection, collision warnings, tire pressure monitors, adaptive cruise control, collision mitigation, automatic braking, lane departure warning, rollover prevention using stability control, emergency response systems, and navigation systems. Also, let's not forget what big cities like LA and Pittsburgh used to be like. If these cities today had the same older cars, they'd have way more smog than they do today. Contrast that to the modern car. Due to regulations and improved engineering technologies, modern cars output considerably less emissions than before. In the old days, it used to be that 15 miles a gallon wasn't bad for a car. Since gas was cheap, it didn't bother most people. But compare that to now, where the Toyota Prius gets an impressive 50 miles a gallon, and this doesn't surprise anyone today. If we were keeping a scorecard on all aspects of vehicle quality, we could list item by item what improvements have been made with a modern car. Take, for example, renewable fuels. Because of climate change, people have begun to think more about alternative fuels. Now more than ever, people have greater access to alternatives, from hybrids to all electrics. It has never been easier to find the right hybrid or EV to suit your needs than right now. Early cars had no doors, windshields, turn signals, or even a steering wheel. Up until the 1980s or so, it was nerve-wracking to drive in the rain. Also, the heaters back then didn't work as well. Remember, too, you had to manually roll down and up your windows, and also adjust the side mirrors by hand. It was normal for cars back then to rust after 2 to 5 years. Compare that to what we have now, and obviously we've come a long way. If you compare the quality of a 1993 Honda Accord SE interior with that of a modern Honda Accord LE, you will immediately notice that the plastic and leather of the older model is thicker and the quality is better. We're talking about two cars that differ by more than 25 years. Here's my point. If the 1993 Accord had run 300,000 miles like today's Accord, its finish would probably remain as shiny as it was from the assembly plant. But the same can't be said about the newer model. In fact, more and more car enthusiasts are noticing that the seats wear out faster, the door handles fail, and many accessories are of subpar in quality. But before we jump to conclusions on whether the interior quality, finish, and durability is really suffering, we have to remember that modern cars last longer. In fact, 3 times longer. With cars that are lasting longer, more people are noticing that the trim materials are aging. So it's not that interior quality went down necessarily. Older cars just didn't last long enough for people to notice interior materials fading or wearing badly. The same can be said about engines. In the old days, cars were built from thicker steel, so the engines had to be more powerful to work harder to move these heavier cars. Naturally, they wore out faster. But today's cars are made mostly from plastic, aluminum, and thinner steel. Engines are built from modern materials and components, and they move cars that are lighter than in days past. So they last longer than previous generations. But on the other hand, as they become smaller and lighter, they're subjected to the same, if not more, stress. Not because of how much weight they pull, but because of how long they have to work, since cars live 3 times longer. So that adds to the wear and tear. And since newer engines have even more complex internal structures due to regulated turbos, variable valve timing, and other systems to meet emission standards and control fuel consumption, well, all this can complicate basic repairs and maintenance. This also applies to complex electrical problems with modern cars. Let's talk about electronics. I like to use technology if it improves something or makes driving safer. But technology for technology's sake, I'm referring to new convenience functions that are presented as a safety feature at first glance, but in reality, they really don't make the car any safer or more reliable. Personally, I believe that when a driver is behind the wheel, he should be in full control and fully alert and aware of everything on the road. Each time the control module receives an action signal from the driver then must request the action be performed, which is a new potential point of failure for the system each time. The same trend has emerged with the introduction of high-tech transmissions by automakers. I'm talking about dual clutch shifters, a form of automatic transmission that uses electronic controls that mimic the operation of a manual transmission. All of this is high-tech, but unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily equate to reliability. In many cases, owners are increasingly reporting transmission flaws in these vehicles. Owners of the Silverado and Sierra are increasingly talking about problems with such transmissions. Even Tesla owners continue to report issues related to assembly like build and finish defects. Of the 4 Tesla vehicles, only the Model 3 can claim reliability according to Consumer Reports. Plus, consider this, none of these new technologies actually improve your driving skills. That's food for thought. I'm talking about features like adaptive cruise control, which maintains the distance to the vehicle in front, automatic collision mitigation, and automatic lane keep. This over-reliance on technology will desensitize you over time. You can get lax on your alertness and even lose some of your driving skills. The same goes true for parallel parking. Being able to parallel park your car is a necessary skill. That's why it's part of most standard driving tests. But if your car does it for you, yes, it's convenient, but it certainly doesn't improve your own driving skills in any way. Let's talk about the multi-purpose LCD screens that are everywhere these days. We have to admit that the presence of a panel in which you must cycle through several pages to display relevant and important information can cause a dangerous distraction. Having to go through several hoops to set up a climate control on the same panel as your music player, navigation, etc. is not ideal. Or try reconnecting your phone to your car's Bluetooth system while driving. The point is, tactile buttons in some cases are simply better than multiple controls that are bundled into a single touchscreen infotainment system. system. Plus, they're a heck of a lot easier to fix when they break. You don't have to look down when you're driving, but with a touchscreen, you absolutely must look down to adjust and select volumes or temperatures and so forth. Also, in modern cars, did you know that a problem with a radio could also impact other unrelated systems? That's because the ECU constantly pings the radio system, since numerous systems in a car communicate primarily through the radio system. So if your radio malfunctions or dies, other auxiliary systems, including climate control, may also fail, and you could be forced to completely change the entire module. But for many owners, certain automotive technologies continue to perform poorly or inconsistently. Should we count that as lack of reliability? It's partly yes, because many cars that are equipped with the latest technology are in fact less reliable due to these new technologies, which are inconsistent in performance, especially compared to the increased lifespan of newer cars. Reports ranked the 10 most reliable cars in 2021 and the 10 least reliable. The Toyota Prius came out on top as the most reliable car. The Chevy Silverado and GMC Sierra pickups were rated the least reliable, and Mazda scored the highest overall score among the 26 ranked brands, in part due to its stylish design. One factor that boosted Mazda's reliability ratings is that Mazda hasn't invested heavily in modern infotainment systems, which tend to generate many complaints in the car industry. Mazda is one of the few car brands to release new models without a touchscreen. Every year of PP100, it's its vehicle dependability study every year. It looks like problems reported by owners of new cars during the most recent 12 months in a 3-year period of ownership. They use a metric of PP100, which means the number of problems per 100 cars. A lower PP100 score means less problems and higher dependability. According to the study, the quality of new cars improved for the 4th year in a row and reached its best level in history. Of all brands studied, Korean and Japanese car brands showed some of the best results with just 115 problems over every 100 cars. As for US brands, their score is above average at 126 PP100. Now you've heard my opinion about the reliability of modern cars, but you tell me, what do you think? Have cars become more reliable or less? Please comment below and share any funny or horror experiences you've had. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks for your support.